Hi everyone, and welcome back to Coachy TV. Today we're going to be talking about VO2 max and why it matters. A lot of people use that term VO2 max, but I want to make sure that you really understand why this matters for you and your athlete when you're training in these distance and middle distance events. I am Kyle Giacono. I'm the head boys cross country and track coach at Wharton High School in Tampa, Florida, and I have been for the last 6 years. If you want to know a little bit more about my credentials, they are on the screen. So what is VO2 max? This is essentially your body's maximum ability to use oxygen. Whatever intensity they're doing, in this case we're talking about running obviously, but any type of activity, this is the intensity at which their body cannot produce any more energy aerobically. This is it. It's the aerobic cap. Anything more intense than this, and your body has to get the energy anaerobically. And as we all know, anaerobic energy does not come nearly as nicely. It's not nearly as easy for your body to work with. It has much more of a limiting factor on it that we're going to talk about later. So typically, this is expressed in terms of O2 consumed or oxygen consumed per kilogram of body weight per minute in whatever's being tested. And here are a couple of different animals as well as humans to see by comparison. So at the very top, the slowest, least aerobically designed animal is the tree sloth. Obviously, it's not very fast, it doesn't do a lot of work, and it only can use 20 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. Interestingly enough, an untrained human has the same VO2 max as a pig, which is about 36. And these are all generalities, but for the most part, that's where an untrained person is. The great thing about humans is we are very trainable. We adapt very well, so you can almost double somebody's VO2 max with the proper training. Now, below this are some animals that are obviously very well known for their ability to do a lot of very fast work for a long period of time. A racehorse and a sled dog. And then a hummingbird uses so much energy to keep its little body in flight all the time without really moving, just that hovering mechanic that they use. So they have a VO2 max that's very, very high because they do so much work for such a long period of time. So VO2 max in terms of workouts and the intensities that you're doing these at. So at the very top, VO2 max is, again, as we mentioned, the highest point of oxygen use reached during exhaustive exercise, and it comes with a significant increase in anaerobic energy demand. So even though it's your maximum aerobic capacity, your body is producing a lot of energy anaerobically at this time. Now, it's kind of a misnomer to say that your body only makes energy aerobically until a certain point. Your body's always making energy aerobically and anaerobically. At lower intensities, it's just predominantly relying on the aerobic energy system. So when we get to this type of maximum aerobic intensity, your body's going to have much more of a demand from its anaerobic energy systems. Aerobic energy production is much, much slower, but it's much more efficient, and it creates much easily to deal with waste products, just CO2 that we breathe out, and water that your body can use in other areas. But anaerobic energy production, as we were just mentioning, it's much, much faster, and it burns much more glucose and is more difficult to deal with waste products. So aerobic energy, it takes one molecule of glucose, or stored glucose, which is called glycogen, to produce 38 ATP molecules. And ATP is what your body uses for any type of energy, any muscle contractions. Versus anaerobic energy is way, way faster. Well, I'll do a whole video on the way your body creates energy aerobically, but the anaerobic system is much, much faster in how it produces the energy, but it's much less efficient because it takes that same one glucose molecule and only can create 2 ATP molecules. So aerobic is 1 to 38, anaerobic is 1 to 2. So that's one of the issues with the anaerobic system, but obviously it's much faster. And then this is the other issue that comes with it is lactic acid. The limiting factor on days that you're training VO2 max, which is also called aerobic power, is going to be the accumulation of acid in their working muscles. And as I mentioned, VO2 max comes with a very significant contribution from your anaerobic system. And if you ever wondered, when your body is making energy anaerobically, this is the waste product. It's lactic acid is what it looks like. And your body only has this in its system in the muscles for about a quarter second, and then it splits this into two different molecules. Off to the left here, from here on over, is lactate, which your body can actually shuttle back into the liver, and it makes more stored glucose or glycogen out of. And then this little guy off to the side, This is the thing that actually causes the issue in your working muscles. This is what makes more acid in your body. It increases it decreases the pH of your working muscles, and your muscles don't like this at all. And this is what can cause the problem, and it's the limiting factor on these days. Ideally, what we would do is we would raise our VO2 max so that we can create more energy aerobically and have less of an issue with this guy forming in our system. So that's what we're going to talk about here and why it's so important. That's the biggest reason why it's so important, but we're going to see how it affects different races here in a minute. If we look here at an energy continuum, these are all the paces that a human can run from long, slow distance recovery or aerobic threshold paces all the way out to what would be known as like a fly 30 or a stick drill or whatever your sprint coaches would typically call those very maximum speed type workouts. VO2 max is right in the middle. It's the fastest aerobic energy demand you can use, fastest pace you can run aerobically, but obviously you can run faster than this because of the anaerobic system. Typically, this is around 102 to 97% of a date pace is what you could run, say, a 3K in, which is obviously a little bit faster than a 2-mile. A 2-mile test is one of the best ways to actually test someone's VO2 max. So a 3K is going to be a little bit faster. As you'll notice, a 5K is a little bit slower at 97%. 10K is even a little bit slower. If you're looking at these numbers right here, the number in green is the percent of energy that is coming aerobically versus anaerobically. So as you can see, there's definitely still much more reliance on the aerobic system, but we're starting to creep up in terms of importance on the anaerobic demand. So ideally, as we mentioned, we want to shift this VO2 max further this way, therefore we can run further at aerobic type of pace. So if you've ever seen two kids, maybe they're going out at 3,200 meters and both of them are just really, really strong and they're going out at a mile pace, and all of a sudden one of the kids just falls off and the other kid's able to maintain that pace. The reason for that is the first kid that fell off was probably actually running closer to this pace, their 1,500 meter, 1,600 meter pace, and they were producing more energy anaerobically. They were producing more acid, and as the race got longer, their body couldn't clear it, and they eventually fell off. Whereas the other kid was running aerobically the whole time. They could have run faster than the pace they were on the first mile, but they would have fallen off. And this is why one kid would win the 3,200 meter, and another kid may die off, even though they were running the exact same pace earlier on. The trick with this is obviously knowing what your kid's VO2 max pace is if you're setting up some race targets. And we'll talk about race design weeks later, since most people in the country right now here in June are looking more at a base buildup. But that's why this actually happens and why we want to move the VO2 max. So let's take a little look here at why it matters in terms of race performance. So this is based on a study that was done by Ingham in 2008. So it's a little bit old at this point, but for the most part, some subsequent studies have found this exact same data to be true. So this is the win predictor based on endurance events, based on some different indicators. So what these people did was they went out and they wanted to know, why does this person do well in this event? What is the single indicator that would say that this person does better in this race versus somebody else? And they looked at a whole bunch of different things. They looked at leg length. They looked at fat to muscle composition of the bodies. And they looked at some of these things that are on the screen here. Running economy and VO2 max seem to be the bigger indicators in these different races. So let's just take a look here. So the one that was the biggest single indicator on VO2 max is the 5K. If we think back to the energy continuum, the 5K is run very, very close at your VO2 max, 97%. And based on this study they did in 2008 where they looked at world championships, USATF meets, they looked at a ton of professional and semi-professional meets when they got this data. But they found that whoever had the best VO2 max in the 5K, they won the race 94.3% of the time. Most of us are getting ready for cross country and most states run the 5K. This tells you who's going to win the race most of the time. Now, it's not 100%. Maybe a kid with better VO2 max went out too fast and there's some other race things. Maybe there was poor weather or just other mechanics that happen. But that's almost a guarantee. If your kid has the better VO2 max, they're going to win the 5K. Now, the interesting thing is, as you get longer, the 10K running economy is the best indicator, and it's not nearly as good of an indicator as who wins a 5K. This is precisely why your college men do a whole lot more work at tempo pace or lactic threshold pace. If you missed my video on aerobic threshold versus lactic threshold workouts, it's in the description down below. But this is precisely why a college male athlete needs to be doing a lot more tempo runs than VO2 max or aerobic power runs. It's very, very different on what is needed to win that race. And one of the important things when you're creating your workout plans for your kids is what is the demand of the race as well as the little intricacies of that athlete. But this is something that you need to know. So if you're building up for a 5K, you want to get your kids' VO2 max as strong as possible. It's the strongest indicator of who's going to win. Now, what about shorter races? A lot of people just want to try and do speed stuff when you're dealing with the 1600 or the 800. And it turns out that you need both these things, running economy and VO2 max, to get a good indicator. So the 1500 meter, which this is dealing with more international, most high schools run either the true mile or the 1600, but 95.5% indicator was a combination of these two, VO2 max over running economy. And this was done based on a tempo run of about 4.5 miles. If you want to, again, look at the study itself, it was by Ingham in 2008, and they go through all the mechanics of how they tested this. But basically, these two things together. But if you were to look at the single indicator in this, VO2 max in even the shorter 1500 meter was even a better indicator than just running economy. But obviously, them two of these together end up having an even better win indicator. So again, another reason why VO2 max is even important in these shorter track type races. And even the shortest of the endurance races, the 800, which some people, I would say, get carried away with doing speed workouts sometimes, 94.1% based on VO2 max, which is your 2-mile pace, and running economy, which the way they did it in the study was basically your 4.5-mile pace. So very long indicators of who wins the 800. And these are pretty strong if you look at it. So if we're talking about how important and why VO2 max matters in a race, if you're a high school coach, which basically that means you're dealing with the bottom three of these races, it is a very strong indicator of who is going to win the race either in track or in cross country. So this is why you should really be focusing on this, especially right now in the summertime when a lot of times we're building up VO2 max in our athletes. This is going to pay dividends later on. If you stay, and we didn't really look at the 3200 meter in here. The study didn't look at the 2-mile, mostly because at the professional and semi-professional level, they don't run this distance. But I would say that just thinking about it, since 3200 meter is one of the best tests for VO2 max itself, it would probably be at least as accurate as the 5K. Again, considering the fact that VO2 max and 3200 meter is basically the same thing. So if you're wondering why is the 3200 meter on here, you could pretty much say it's at least as good of a win indicator as this 5K indicator is. Now, I'm going to do a video that'll be released tomorrow that talks about the difference between peripheral and central VO2 max. There's actually two different things that you can be training at this time of the year. So look for that tomorrow. If you like this video, please consider maybe liking or subscribing or commenting down below. If you missed any of our other series of videos on lactic threshold versus aerobic threshold or easy pace workouts, that's in the description down below, as well as how to test your kids' VO2 max. That's in the description down below. Until next time, this has been Coach TV.